Kurtop here, and these are 100 mysterious artifacts found by children and random passersby. An oak cart. Near Lake Sevan in the Armenian village of Lachation, archaeologists have discovered an object that typically doesn't survive thousands of years, a wooden cart. It had lain in the ground for about 4,000 years, yet remained so intact that its construction allows us to study Bronze Age transport not from drawings but from the actual object. The cart is made of oak with massive wheels and well-preserved axles. Such finds are rare not only in the Caucasus. Wood almost always deteriorates, and archaeologists often find only metal parts. Here, however, the entire cart has been preserved, giving us an idea of what the carts of the local nobility looked like and how they were assembled. Lachation is known for a large Bronze Age necropolis, and many rich burials included carts, weapons, and jewelry. Judging by the quality of the wood and the meticulous craftsmanship, the cart discovered also belonged to a person of high status. It was likely part of the burial inventory. For researchers, this discovery reveals what transport was like in Armenia at that time and confirms that local communities actively used wheeled transport long before the emergence of large states here. The first forest appeared in Russia. In Russia, near Luga in the Tolmachevsky quarry, they found something you usually see in textbooks, not in the sand near a quarry: a fossilized tree stump with real roots. It's approximately 385 million years old, dating back to the late Devonian, a time when land was just beginning to turn green. At first, everyone assumed it was a prototaxite, ancient columnar organisms famous in these parts, but the roots proved it was a tree, not a mushroom-shaped column. An amateur paleontologist discovered the find. He spotted a large piece of rock in the sand, unlike a typical rock, and showed it to specialists. Scientists from St. Petersburg State University then joined in, carefully excavated it, documented it, and sent the sample to the lab. There, thin sections and tissue structure will be used to determine the species and age. What's important is that the first tree stands were already here. The root system held the soil, changed water flow, and influenced the carbon balance. Simply put, the very forest planet we're accustomed to was just beginning. A lot of science and terminology can be piled up here, but the gist is simple. Scientists were looking for a giant mushroom and instead discovered the ancestor of our forests. Now they have to compare the sample with known Devonian trees and pinpoint its true identity. Even if the species name is still in question, the discovery itself is already changing the local picture of the past. The stone architecture of propaganda. If you look for the language of the Reich not in papers but in stone, you'll find it in amphitheaters. Built in the early 1930s as venues for public assemblies and rituals, they actually turned out to be ideal platforms for emotional manipulation. Stone, steps, fire, a voice that travels without a microphone. The most emblematic locations are the Thingstätte on Heidelberg's Heiligenberg and the Berlin Arena, then called Dietrich Eckart Bühne, today's Waldbühne. They all look similar. A semicircle, a high backdrop, hidden passages, places for torches, stone pockets for orchestral musicians, and portable equipment. From above, it looks like romantic ruins, but in situ the engineering is visible. Neat drainage systems, precise geometry, and points for placing columns where people themselves become a drawing. The architecture dictates people's behavior, to stand, listen, and respond in chorus. Here, how the ritual worked is clearly visible. The entrance is a long ribbon down the slope, allowing the procession time to become a single body. On the platform, there's a stone teleprompter. The announcer on the central axis can be heard without equipment because the backdrop catches and returns the voice. On the sides are pockets where banner bearers waited. Higher up, there are points for lighting effects and torch circles. A pair of steps are superfluous. They're not for spectators, but for formations. They can easily be used to lay out a sign, slogan, or symbol. Looking from above, you can immediately grasp the concept. Myths abound around these places. Favorite one, about astronomical alignments. Supposedly, the stage and walkways are aligned with the solstice. There are some locations where this is true, but there's no need to look for cosmic alignment where stage direction is sufficient. The real magic is in the acoustics and geometry. If you stand on Heidelberg's central stone and speak in a normal voice, you can clearly hear it in the upper rows. This creates a miracle effect, although what you're hearing is simply a carefully calculated sound roll-off. After the war, these venues were treated differently. At Heidelberg Thingstätte, the technical details are clearly visible. A narrow service passage behind the stage backdrop, niches for cables and torch holders in the side walls, a drainage system that runs under the stands and empties into a beam so the venue doesn't float after rain. In the upper rows, you can see the marks for the marching intervals. The spacing between the marks matches the width of a standard banner. Berlin's Waldbühne, formerly the Dietrich Eckart Bühne, features a different design. A wide orchestra pit, fan-shaped exits from beneath the stands, and platforms for spotlights at the edges. The stage is designed to accommodate the frontal view of the columns rather than a circular one. These are two different models of the same idea. The stone geometry itself sets the rhythm of movement and space for people, without rituals or grandiose words. Amazonian urns. When a tree fell deep in the Brazilian Amazon, the rounded edges of pottery were revealed beneath its roots. Archaeologists uncovered 7 funerary urns. 2 were particularly large. Inside were human bones, along with those of fish and turtles. The urns lay just 40 centimeters below the surface, likely beneath old houses. There are no ceramic lids. It appears they were covered with organic matter that rotted away. The location is Lake Cochila in the municipality of Fonte Boa. Here, on the high floodplains, artificial islands were built hundreds of years ago. This wasn't a whim, but an engineering feat. Soil was brought in, mixed with ceramic fragments, and arranged so that the platform would support the house and prevent it from being submerged by floodwaters. The urns were found on this platform. The pottery contains an unexpected mix of techniques, plus a rare green clay, known only from a few places in the region. Why fish and turtles ended up in the urns alongside people remains an open question. This could have been a ritual element, a household item, or a symbol of a connection with water. For now, these are hypotheses. But the site's organization, artificial islands and recurring vessel shapes, suggests a regular practice, not a one-off. The urns are currently in Tefe's laboratory. Organic dating, isotope analysis, and paste comparisons will be conducted. Perhaps a name for the tradition will emerge. Glacial copper. Once upon a time, a boulder lay on the banks of the Ontonagon River in Michigan, described by local tribes as a piece of pure copper the size of a house. In the 17th century, this was considered a legend until hunters saw the boulder with their own eyes, huge and smooth, as if it had been deliberately forged by someone in ancient times. Later, it became clear this was no myth. It was one of the largest copper nuggets ever found. Estimates of its weight range from 1 to 10 tons. The actual weight turned out to be around 1,680 kilograms, but the important thing is not the number, but its origin. Thousands of years ago, a 2-kilometer-long glacier passed through this area. It tore out chunks of copper rock and carried them tens of kilometers, leaving behind giant floating nuggets of almost pure metal. In the 19th century, businessman Julius Eldred purchased this boulder twice, from local tribes and from the government, and with incredible labor dragged it through the forest, floated it down a river, and transported it to Detroit. The government later bought it back, paying 4 times its original price. Today, the Ontonagon nugget is housed in the National Museum of Natural History. The region itself has seen much larger finds. A few years ago, a giant boulder weighing 28 tons was discovered in the forest. Alien artifacts on Earth. History keeps finds that do not fit into any chronology. In Turkey, in the temple complex of Göbekli Tepe, there are columns with carved drawings of animals and abstract symbols. They are about 12,000 years old. Officially, at that time, people did not yet know either agriculture or architecture. But here we see an engineering concept and symbolism that has not been fully deciphered. Who built this complex, and why was it later buried as if they were trying to hide it? In South America, in Sacsayhuaman, giant stone blocks are fitted to each other so tightly that it is impossible to push even a blade between them. Stones weighing hundreds of tons are laid with perfect precision and with polygonal edges. Modern technology has difficulty repeating such joints. This means that 500 years ago, the Incas had something that they themselves called the technology of the gods. On the other side of the world, in Baalbek, Lebanon, lies a stone known as the Southern Megalith. It weighs over 1,000 tons. Until now, no one has explained how ancient builders could have moved it. But the fact remains, this block is processed, and it was clearly an attempt to use it in construction. The only question is by whose hands. Similar finds include the Ural metal spirals, the megalithic platforms of Tiwanaku, and perfectly drilled holes in the stones of Egypt, leaving the feeling of a high-precision machine at work. Every culture has artifacts that seem to have wandered from the wrong time. Scientists explain this by primitive technologies, coincidence, and a play of nature. But then why do such coincidences repeat themselves all over the planet, in different eras and among different peoples? The version that these are traces of strangers is convenient not because it is sensational, but because too much begins to fit into one picture. And if these are indeed artifacts left by someone else, then their purpose could be simple: to show that we are not the first, and that everything we build today is just a faint echo of what was already here thousands of years ago. The First King. Belize, Caracol Jungle. For nearly 40 years, married archaeologists Arlen and Diana Chase dug stairs, markets, and dams here until they reached the heart of the Kayana complex, the heavenly place. Beneath the slabs, they found a narrow passageway that opened onto a chamber painted with cinnabar. On the floor was a skeleton, its shoulders entwined with jade beads. Nearby were 11 painted vessels, carved bone tubes, a mosaic mask, and spondylus shells the color of raw meat. Hieroglyphs on the stelae had long named the city's first ruler Tikabchak, Thunderhand. Now the text matched the bone, dating to around 350, just 2 or 3 decades after his ascension, 331. It turns out that Caracol was an independent force even before the famous arrival of the Teotihuacan envoys in 378. It did not wake up from foreign influence. It already ruled, traded, and collected tribute. The things around the body speak for themselves. Jade is a sign of royal blood, cinnabar is a symbol of strength and sacrifice, spondylus shells are long-distance trade through the Caribbean, and thin bone tubes are an attribute of priests who inhaled cocoa powder before rituals. All this is not a random collection, but a portrait of a state, collected in the personal capsule of its founder. For scientists, this is not just a skeleton, but the first chapter of the history of Caracol, hidden by vines for almost 1,500 years. A city on the edge of the desert. A few kilometers from Baghdad, amidst the sands, stands a huge structure that from a distance looks like a natural rock. But this is the Dur Kurigalzu Ziggurat, a temple tower built by the Kassite kings over 3,400 years ago. It was once the capital of a dynasty that ruled Babylonia for nearly 4 centuries. The city was founded by King Kurigalzu I. Its existence was no accident. An important route ran nearby, connecting Mesopotamia with the Iranian plateau and the lapis lazuli mining areas. Dur Kurigalzu covered approximately 225 hectares, was protected by a powerful wall, and consisted of several hills housing residential quarters, temples, and farm complexes. The main building was a huge ziggurat dedicated to Enlil. Today, only the tower's interior, its brick core, remains. The outer layers have been eroded by time, wind, and rain. But it was precisely because of this that scientists were able to see construction details that have been preserved almost nowhere else. Erosion has exposed layers of reed mats and bundles that ancient builders placed between the bricks to strengthen the structure and compensate for subsidence. In the 19th century, travelers confused the ziggurat with the remains of the biblical Tower of Babel, which only added to the site's aura of mystery. In the 1940s, archaeologists cleared the lower levels, and in the 1970s, Iraqi authorities reconstructed part of the first tier in an attempt to halt the deterioration. Today, Dur Kurigalzu is in a fragile state. It is not collapsing instantly, but is slowly crumbling and requires conservation. The fate of the ancient city depends on the stability of the region and the availability of specialists. Desert tunnels leading to nowhere. There are places in Egypt where tourists are not allowed, not because it is dangerous, but because there are too many questions. One such area is located just south of the Giza complex. Under a layer of sand is a network of tunnels, filled in and forgotten, or filled in deliberately. For decades, locals have been talking about empty halls under the sand, where echoes, drafts, and even smells can be heard, as if there is air underground. But officially, there is nothing there, and everything that was accidentally discovered was quickly filled back in. In the 2010s, a group of researchers received a rare permit for ground-penetrating radar scanning, and they discovered long straight structures under the surface, possibly corridors, some with turns, length tens of meters, depth about 5. All of them ran strictly parallel to the main axis of the plateau. But as soon as the data got into the press, permission for further work was revoked. The cameras were removed and the sand was returned to its place. There are photos that show that some of the mines began in crevices among old ruins, stone slopes, steps that seemed to lead down, and all of this was roughly sealed with cement and brick. On one of these walls, someone left a word in English with a nail, silenced. No one knows who wrote it, but too many things indicate that Egypt is not what lies on the surface, but what is underneath it, and it is very important to someone that we do not go down there. The Guardian of Moho. In the highlands of Peru, in the Moho region, there is a stone statue, not tall, outwardly simple, but nevertheless causing a strange feeling. At first glance, it is just a carved monolith in the Tiwanaku style. Clear lines, a static pose, hands folded on the stomach. But the longer you look, the more it seems that the figure is out of context, as if it did not come from this time, and not even from this continent. The statue is called Moho Huaca. Its base is made in the form of a cross, reminiscent of the Andean chacana, an ancient symbol where each side denotes a level of the world, upper, middle, lower. But in this case, the cross is twisted in a spiral, clockwise, which in itself is rare and perhaps indicates a ritual meaning lost over time. However, what attracts attention most of all is not the style or the symbolism, but the strange similarities. The pose of the statue, its hands lowered and folded on its stomach, its direct gaze, all of this unexpectedly echoes the images of the Moai from Easter Island. And even earlier, with the stone steles from Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. The same composition, the same gestures, the same restraint. Completely different cultures, separated by thousands of kilometers and centuries, but seemingly using the same language of form. A buried Ferrari. In the backyard of an ordinary Los Angeles home buried beneath a layer of earth was not a hoard of gold coins, ancient tools, or the remains of old machinery, but a nearly new Ferrari Dyno 246 GTS. The car was buried just a few dozen centimeters deep, carefully wrapped in plastic and with all openings plugged with towels, as if it was intended to be preserved rather than hidden. Detectives expected to find bodies or drugs inside, but the interior was empty. Only the traces of time and perfectly preserved parts of the sports car. A license plate check revealed that the Ferrari had been stolen 3 years earlier. The owner collected the insurance and the case was closed. But why bury such a car? One of the detectives later admitted there were no kids who accidentally found the car. An informant had told them where to dig, hoping to secure a deal. The investigation revealed that the thieves were supposed to sink the car in the ocean, but they liked it so much that they decided to hide it and return later. But as we've already learned, they never returned. The insurance company sold the excavated car at a closed auction, and the new owner completely restored it. Eerie discovery under the floor. An ordinary day for Amelia turned into a real investigation. She noticed that one of the floorboards in her house was loose and decided to lift it to find out the reason. However, instead of a simple breakage, strange objects were found under the board. An old coin from 1904 and a small golden book. Opening the book, she discovered that the pages were unusually thick. Inside were old photographs, creepy images of the house, dark shadows in empty rooms, and mysterious portraits. Perhaps the house holds dark secrets of the past, or maybe the photographs have simply aged. However, Amelia herself was seriously scared by the discovery. She admitted that since then she has felt anxious and wants to know what other secrets her house is hiding. The first green mummy. In one of the tombs of the Egyptian necropolis in Abydos, archaeologists stumbled upon a sarcophagus covered inside with a thin green coating. At first, they thought it was simply traces of copper or mold, but analysis revealed that it was genuine malachite mineral deposits. Over time, these deposits permeated the mummy's bandages and skin, giving the body a strange greenish tint. The burial is approximately 2,600 years old. Inside was a man whose bones and attributes suggest a wealthy man, but not a pharaoh. Amulets, vessels of incense, and the remains of an oil mixture used to cover the body before mummification were found in the tomb. It was this mixture containing copper salts that caused the mummy to turn green centuries later. For the Egyptians, green was more than just decorative. It was the color of rebirth, Osiris, vegetation, and eternal life. Therefore, this random chemical reaction also contains symbolism. The body truly became eternal, not metaphorically, but literally. Copper compounds could have entered the tomb from jewelry, vessels, or pigments used in painting, but the result itself is so unusual that the mummy was given the unofficial name green. The Algerian Atlantis. The underwater part of Tipasa is now being studied as seriously as the ruins on the shore. Divers and marine archaeologists are documenting amphorae, cisterns, storage niches, and most importantly, a pier carved into the rock, which looks like an engineering feature rather than a random landform. These fragments piece together a picture of a port that operated from at least the 4th century BC to the 3rd century AD, and the profile of the finds points to regular trade rather than occasional waste dumped into the sea. UNESCO insists on expanding the protected waters because the surf quickly erodes the cultural layer, and without the designated area, the site is vulnerable to illegal diving, which would mean losing even what we have seen. The team is recovering artifacts spotted back in the spring and following the dark contours of the structures with new equipment, but only a series of dives and sediment analysis will provide a definitive answer. Is this a sunken city washed away by the waves, or the lower tier of an ancient harbor gradually submerged beneath the waves? What's most compelling here isn't the word Atlantis, but the opportunity to peer into the workings of a real port that fed 3 eras, the Phoenician, Roman, and Byzantine at once. If we can document the layout of the piers and cisterns, we'll finally understand what exactly this coastal hub looked like, something the sources remain silent about but the sea still preserves. An intact tomb with jewelry. During excavations in the northern part of Budapest, archaeologists stumbled upon a stone sarcophagus that looked as if it had been closed yesterday. There were no signs of forced entry or attempts at reuse, a rarity in the 4th century Roman Empire, where tombs were often opened and reused. Here, however, the lid was sealed so securely that no one doubted the archaeologists were in for a surprise. Inside the sarcophagus lay the neatly arranged skeleton of a young woman. Nearby lay glass vessels, delicate bronze figurines, a bone pin, an amber pendant, and about 140 coins. Even remnants of fabric with gold thread were preserved, a rare occurrence for ancient clothing to survive centuries. The archaeologists immediately realized that this was no ordinary person's tomb. The girl belonged to a wealthy class, possibly the family of an administrator of Aquincum, a Roman city on the Danube. In ancient times, legions were stationed here, trade routes passed through, and life on the border of the empire was in full swing. The sarcophagus was found among the ruins of houses, next to an aqueduct and several other burial sites, but none of them compares to this tomb in richness and state of preservation. When clearing the bottom of the sarcophagus, specialists found a 4-centimeter thick layer of dirt. It is carefully sifted because miniature jewelry such as earrings, buckles, and needles are often found in such places. Some of it may still be hidden there. Even after 1,700 years, it is clear that the girl was buried with great care. Such finds remind us that behind every ancient tomb lies someone's real life and the people who loved that person. Factory on bones. 125,000 years ago, Lake Neumark Nord, today's Germany. Archaeologists raised 120,000 bone fragments and 16,000 flint tools from a layer of silt. Not knives, but heavy hammers. Almost all the long bones of horses, deer, and aurochs are split in the same way. A neat longitudinal seam, as if they were opened for the filling. Nearby are ancient fireplaces. In the ashes, charred nuts, acorns, blackthorn. But the main thing is the so-called bone cauldrons. Tubular bones are burned on the outside, cleaned out on the inside, and placed vertically in the fire. In them, the brain was melted to liquid fat, a concentrate of calories, without which the glacial diet of protein alone would lead to rabbit disease and death. The scenario is clear. Hunters dragged carcasses to the water, crushed them, rendered the fat, mixed them with plant additives, and probably stored or exchanged them for other resources. This is not the improvisation of hungry vagabonds. It looks more like a food factory, where the production, processing, and logistics of finished products took place. Lake Neumark Nord destroys the image of a primitive Neanderthal. Before us are people who planned a seasonal menu, understood the chemistry of food, and put fatty fuel on stream long before the appearance of the first clay pot. A person can't fit in there. Inside the Great Pyramid, there are strange passages that for decades were thought to be ventilation shafts. But the problem is that neither air nor humans have ever gotten through. These shafts start in the so-called Queen's Room and extend upward at an acute angle, resting against stone plugs with copper inserts. At first, they weren't even taken seriously, and then they sent a robot there. In 1993, engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink designed a mechanism that could get through. It crawled along the smooth walls as if the shaft had been specially polished. At the end of its path, the robot came across a stone slab with two pins that resembled door handles. It seemed that something was hidden behind it, but it was urgently recalled. Archaeologists remained silent. The Egyptian authorities did not give permission for a second attempt, and Gantenbrink was simply removed from the project. The second robot, launched later, made a tiny hole, and behind it was another chamber. It is unclear whether it was empty or whether no one wants to talk about what was found in it. These shafts could not have been used by anyone in life. They are too narrow, but they are ideal for storing something that should remain untouched. Head of Medusa. At Emperor Hadrian's villa in Tivoli, archaeologists discovered a bronze head of the Gorgon Medusa, the very same mythical figure who was supposed to turn people to stone with a single glance. But in reality, it served a different purpose. In Roman culture, Medusa's image served as a protective symbol. Her face was placed on shields, on the walls of houses, on shoulder pads, and even on floors, to ward off evil. The Tivoli head dates back to around 120 AD. It is made of bronze with detailed serpentine strands and a calm, almost human expression. This is not a terrifying monster, but rather an idealized image. The Romans often softened the features of mythical creatures, turning them into decorative elements. Hadrian's villa was a vast complex with pools, halls, gardens, and copies of Greek statues. The emperor collected everything he saw on his travels there: architecture, sculpture, and decorative elements. The head of Medusa probably decorated one of the halls or the facade, fitting into the overall program of the villa, where Greek myths were combined with Roman taste. Pyramid of the oldest civilization. The Norte Chico culture, also known as Caral soup, is considered one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations of the Andes. It existed about 5,000 years ago and achieved significant advances in architecture, agriculture, and social organization. Archaeologists recently discovered a pyramidal structure about a kilometer from the sacred city of Caral Supa in the Sup Valley, Peru. The structure is a quadrangular building with a wide staircase leading to the top. Its walls are decorated with massive vertical stones, huancas, which may have had not only structural but also ritual significance. In addition to the pyramid, the researchers found 12 public and ceremonial buildings located around a central plaza of almost 39 hectares. This indicates the existence of a small urban center with administrative and religious functions. 3 platforms were identified in the pyramid, which indicates a complex architectural tradition of the Caral civilization. At the Chupatzigaro site, archaeologists also discovered a unique geoglyph, made in the Sechina style. It depicts a human profile and is likely associated with rituals reflecting access to the region's marine and agricultural resources. Has Nazi gold finally been discovered? In the summer of 2025, Poland began what archaeologists had feared for decades and treasure hunters had dreamed of: official excavations of the legendary Reich gold. No big headlines, no sensational maps, just quietly and methodically, like investigating an old murder. On the outskirts of the village of Mikołajki in the Kashubian forest, ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. It was more than 10 meters deep, rectangular in shape, with metallic reflections. And for the first time in years, Polish authorities issued official permission for the excavation. The site has long been shrouded in legend. According to one theory, the route of the Ernst Koch convoy, the former Gauleiter of East Prussia, passed through here, allegedly attempting to smuggle crates of gold, platinum, and precious stones out of Königsberg. Another theory holds that it housed an SS auxiliary warehouse where documents, paintings, and church relics were stored, not gold. Archaeologists weren't promising any treasures, but the first centimeters of excavation revealed oddities. Fragments of metal seals, broken boxes, and wooden debris marked with BSCH, an abbreviation used in the 1940s to designate the Bundesschlaghaus, the state mint. The official press covered the excavation quietly, but behind the scenes, adults rejoiced like children. Every meter down seemed like a step toward unraveling one of Europe's most notorious wartime legends. Old reports, SS protocols, and Polish foresters' notes about German trucks without headlights in April 1945 surfaced. Everything fit together to form a story long considered a fairy tale. But the deeper the excavations went, the more the fairy tale turned into a documentary thriller. At a depth of 7 meters were the remains of a steel grate, fragments of locks, and a layer of bitumen, as if someone had tried to seal the treasure. Scanners revealed a void beneath, and then, for the first time in many years, local authorities allowed journalists in to show what it was like when legend meets reality. The strangest thing happened later. 3 weeks before the end of the season, the excavation site was suddenly sealed. Only a small group of specialists and the police remained on the site. Officially, it was due to the risk of a collapse. Unofficially, it was because they found something metallic, but not what they expected. From that point on, the details diverge. Some speak of a massive door at an angle, others of traces of a tunnel leading under an old road from the Nazi era. Archaeologists remain silent. Their reports are not published. The Polish Ministry of Culture stated only one thing: elements of an engineering structure and objects requiring examination have been discovered. That's all. No photos, no comments. It is in such circumstances that myths are born. When a fact isn't accompanied by an explanation, there's room for conjecture. It's said that one of the researchers involved in the excavation resigned the day after the site was closed. Others claim that what was delivered to the Warsaw laboratory wasn't gold, but an object that shouldn't have been touched without military assistance. Ocean Ghost. In late November 1896, 2 boys were riding bicycles along the beach of Anastasia Island when they suddenly saw something in the sand that made them abandon their bikes. A boat-sized carcass lay on the shore, shapeless, pale pink, as if cast from rubber. No bones, no eyes, no head, just a huge, dense lump of flesh that looked as if the ocean had washed ashore a creature from a nightmare. A local physician, Dr. Webb, arrived on the scene the next morning and immediately realized it wasn't a whale. But what then? The carcass was elastic, heavy, and, by his estimate, weighed nearly 5 tons. He concluded that it was a gigantic octopus, unknown to science. Later, photographs were sent to the university, and Professor Verrill, a leading expert on cephalopods, initially confirmed the suspicion. Then he went further and named the creature a new species, Octopus giganteus. The carcass was towed from the water by 6 horses to prevent it from being washed away by the waves. It became a local sensation. People flocked to see the Florida monster, seemingly straight out of the pages of maritime legend. But decades later, when the preserved tissue samples were examined under an electron microscope, everything came crashing down. There was no giant octopus. The tissue consisted of pure collagen. It was whale skin, decomposed to the point where both shape and bone had been lost. Today, scientists call such finds globsters, dense clumps of organic matter that the ocean washes ashore, transforming an ordinary carcass into something resembling a mythical monster. Darius's gold. During excavations in Persepolis, workers discovered a stone box laid beneath the foundation of the Apollona Palace. Inside were 2 thin plates, one gold, one silver. They were placed there during construction approximately 2,500 years ago during the reign of Darius the Great. Both plates contain cuneiform inscriptions in 3 languages. It was important to Darius that the text be understood across the vast empire. It lists lands, emphasizes his power, and thanks Ahura Mazda. This is not a decorative object or part of a ritual. It is a declaration of who built here, who owned the territory, and under which god the palace stood. The plates are as well preserved as if they had just been removed from the workshop. The metal is uncracked and the inscriptions are easily read. They were deliberately hidden in the foundation, not as a secret but as a sign for future generations should anyone ever peer beneath the stone. The deception of the century that still exists. In the mid-19th century, London was swept by a craze for medieval Lied artifacts. Medallions, amulets, and coins with crude carvings, strange dates, and meaningless inscriptions appeared on the market. Many experts declared the items authentic. No modern counterfeiter would make such a sloppy forgery. They were mistaken. The perpetrators turned out to be two low-level dealers, William Smith and Charles Eaton. In 1857, they set up a cottage industry on the banks of the Thames. Plaster molds, lead alloys, acid antique, and a coating of river silt. They were unable to imitate the inscriptions. They wrote at random using Arabic numerals where Roman numerals would have been used in the Middle Ages. The crudeness became proof of authenticity. Leading antiquarians, including Charles Roach Smith, seriously argued that a forger would have worked more efficiently. The scale of the fraud was enormous, up to 10,000 items over several years. Doubts arose due to the sheer quantity. In 1858, Henry Sayer Cumming publicly announced the forgeries, but the controversy dragged on until politician and antiquarian Charles Reed launched his own investigation. He lured away one of his accomplices and obtained plaster molds, direct proof of the origin of the antiquities. Then the story became even more absurd. After the exposure, Smith and Eaton continued their craft and even improved their quality. There were arrests on a tip from a priest, a release due to lack of evidence, and Smith's disappearance after his partner's death. The duo's legacy lives on. Their medieval artifacts are found in museum collections and pop up at online auctions, once again catching those who believe that curvature is a sign of authenticity. Given the number of artifacts they made, it's hard to imagine how many are now held in museums around the world, and especially in private collections. After all, few people would want to admit that they once bought a metal dummy for a huge amount of money. Mound under the fort. Russia. Salakard, territory of the Abdorsky Fort. When digging a trench, they uncovered a burial ground of the Neolithic period, about 5,000 years old. More than 12.5 burials. The rituals are different. Some bodies are tightly wrapped in birch bark. Others lie in boats, miniature vessels for the journey to the underworld. The burial pits were dug up to 2 meters deep with steps down, a reverse staircase like an inverted ziggurat. The walls were lined with boards. Everything was generously sprinkled with ochre. On top was a wooden flooring, then an embankment. Inverted vessels were placed on the embankment. The soil sank. The vessels fell inside and preserved the layer. In a number of chambers, there are traces of fire. They were set on fire before the final backfill. The dead were also sprinkled with ochre and supplied with things. The main sensation is ancient copper items, a trapezoid pendant, fragments of a bronze plate, and small parts. In the Arctic 5,000 years ago, metal was either a long-distance exchange or a chain of intermediaries, which means that northerners did not live in isolation. Before us is not a boring cemetery, but a whole collection of artifacts and rituals. Birch bark as a cocoon, a boat as a symbol of transition, fire as purification, ochre as the blood of the earth, copper as prestige. The North shows that complex rituals and long-distance connections reached here much earlier than we are accustomed to thinking. Sumerian planisphere. In the 19th century, archaeologists were sorting through the library of King Ashurbanipal in Nineveh and among thousands of tablets discovered a strange round piece of clay. It bore lines, sectors, and cuneiform. It was later discovered to be one of the oldest star maps created by the Sumerians approximately 5,500 years ago. The planisphere is small but meticulously crafted. It marks sections of the sky, the positions of the stars, and notes on a rare bright object observed during that era. For the Sumerians, this was not an abstraction. Such tablets helped them calculate time, holidays, and agricultural cycles. People didn't look at the sky for romance. They needed to understand when to expect floods, storms, or the beginning of a season. And the most astonishing thing is that this map is still legible. Even after thousands of years, one can see how the ancient Mesopotamians tried to organize and understand the night sky. This small object demonstrates how early humans began to systematically study the world around them. Barelek Cemetery. Yakutia, Barelek River. You won't find any shells or beautiful stones here, but you can stumble upon ancient tusks and skulls sticking out of the ground. This is one of the largest mammoth cemeteries on the planet. Thousands of bones, some thousands of years old, hold the mysteries of the past. Why did so many animals die in one place? The cemetery was first discovered in 1947, but the first serious studies began only in the 1970s. Scientists then suggested that mammoths came to the river in search of food, but the swampy banks could not support their weight and the animals drowned. Lighter animals could pass further without problems. Over 39 years, paleontologists have extracted more than 8.5 thousand bones from the ground, 99.5% of which belong to mammoths. At least 150 individuals have been found, but time, smugglers, and even ancient people have left their mark. A site was discovered nearby where our ancestors split mammoth bones to create tools and weapons. The latest research has shown that hunters did not come here by chance. They purposefully drove mammoths into this area. For 1,000 years, people regularly returned to this place, getting meat and tusks. This cemetery is not just a natural phenomenon, but traces of an ancient hunting strategy. Imagine, in 1,000 years, humanity has gone from nomadic hunting to space exploration. And in the past, people could return to the same place for centuries for the sake of survival. We will probably never achieve such stability again. Lednica face. Poland, Lednica Lake. During work on the coastal zone of the first Piast fortress, archaeologists raised a 1.34-meter-long oak beam, part of the fortress hook that kept the rampart from falling apart. At one end, there is a carved human face, an oval rim, an arc above the forehead, a rounded chin. The size is approximately 13.5 by 10 centimeters. The face did not look into the fortress, but towards the water. Dendrochronology gave the exact age of the tree felling, around 960 to 975 AD, the same time when the prince's residence, chapel, and baptismal pools stood on Lednis Island. For the Slavs of the 10th century, carved human faces on building elements are a rarity. Here the image was brought out to the outside of the rampart as if someone addressed it to the lake. Perhaps this is the image of the spirit of water or the patron saint of the crossing. Perhaps a reminder of Christianity on the verge of paganism. The island is a key point of baptism of the Polish lands. They compare it with the Slavic anthropomorphic figurines from Wolan and four-faced idols. There are stylistic echoes, but no direct analogies. The carved face is currently undergoing conservation. The wood is being stabilized so that it does not crack in the air. The plan is to display the find in the Museum of the First Piasts in the second half of 2026. Stone Tomb. In the north of Morocco, where the Tangier Peninsula looks out onto Gibraltar, archaeologists have found not just a cemetery, but an entire ritual map. 3 ancient necropolises, burials in stone boxes, standing stones, geometric signs, and caves with wall paintings. All this in a region that archaeologists have rarely talked about before. One of the tombs was dated precisely to 2000 BC. This is a site, a rectangular niche carved into the stone with slabs on top. It was not an easy job. It took a lot of time and effort, and all for the sake of burying the body in a strictly defined shape. But why? On the walls nearby are bitriangles, patterns of 8 triangles superimposed on each other. Sometimes they are interpreted as female figures or symbols of goddesses. There are also circles with dots, waves, squares with lines. All this resembles a picture encrypted in stone, but we do not yet understand the language of this picture. There are standing stones around, some taller than a person. They could serve as both borders and places of power. Perhaps it was here that ancient people gathered to bury, pray, celebrate something. All this thousands of years ago. Medieval humor. Museums in Belgium hold an unusual ceramic plate from the late 15th century. It depicts no kings, no battles, no saints. Instead, it depicts a wife openly beating her husband, who shields himself with his hands as best he can. The plate was made in Dinant or Malines, the centers of ceramic production in the Burgundian Netherlands. Such pieces were often commissioned not as formal tableware, but as humorous gifts. Sometimes they were given as wedding gifts, sometimes as humorous reminders of family life. For researchers, this plate is valuable not only for its design, but also for its context. It demonstrates that people of that time knew how to laugh at themselves and their everyday problems. And judging by the prevalence of such scenes, the theme of "Who's the Boss" was already popular 500 years ago. U-boats are now in 3D. We're used to seeing submarines in archival photos, black and white silhouettes and legends. Now things are different. Submarines are now read like architecture. Multi-beam sonar, photogrammetry, underwater laser, and a Type 7 or 9 hull unfolds on the screen down to the rivet. Details that explain an entire war are visible. The first thing that strikes you on real models is the damage. On one submarine, the stern is twisted like a tin can. A depth charge detonated near the rudder. The skin sheets are turned outward, a crack runs along a seam, and the direction of the shock wave is immediately apparent. This isn't speculation. 3D shows the geometry of the metal, and it doesn't lie. Another has a hole near the bow below the waterline, and nearby is a trace of a cable. It looks like a mine cable was caught, and then a destroyer's fire finished it off. Such things used to be guessed from eyewitness accounts. Now they're visible. The most striking feature is the hatches. On many submarines, they're frozen in one position. Some are open, indicating the crew was attempting to exit. Others are closed and jammed, with air bubbles and sludge visible inside, indicating rapid escape. The markings on the propeller, the shape of the conning tower, the type of periscope housing, these easily link the submarine to its departure date and last radio contact. Then it becomes clear how the last voyage went. Base, hunting area, point of destruction. The surviving components sometimes reveal the underlying failure. A warp after overloading the torpedoes, a damaged depth rudder, a torn drive, and the submarine becomes a motionless target. Finally, the condition of the hull reveals how it lies on the seabed. Peeled paint along the edges, growths, sediment streaks along the side. These signs reveal which way the current pulled it, what tore it off first, and which elements were torn off after the sinking. All of this is becoming more interesting to us because we can now study old military equipment in great detail, even that stored deep underwater. We can now recreate the moment a submarine sank, show what a naval battle looked like in the 1940s, and compare it all with the archival documents we have left. The Tunguska explosion happened earlier than we thought. In northern Yakutia, in the Verkhoyansk Range, a group of geologists discovered an anomalous zone containing dozens of charred rocks and trees piled in one direction. At first glance, there was nothing unusual. Fires and landslides are common in these areas, but analysis revealed that the charring was not caused by combustion, but by a short-term, very powerful thermal pulse. Within a few days, the site was dubbed Little Tunguska. The scale of destruction there, of course, is incomparable to the impact of the famous 1008 body, but the signs are remarkably similar. A radial pattern of fallen taiga, microscopic spherules of fused quartz, traces of rare metals such as iridium and nickel. All of this is characteristic of cosmic impacts. Researchers are cautious in their conclusions. It is possible that this is the remains of a meteorite that disintegrated in the atmosphere with only the shock wave reaching the ground. Or perhaps it's part of a vast impact belt associated with the same event as the Tunguska explosion. A direct connection hasn't yet been proven, but there are similarities in chemical composition. The main mystery is the age. Radiocarbon dating of trees and soil indicates that the disaster occurred not in the early 20th century, but approximately 1,000 years earlier. This means that Tunguska-type explosions could have occurred in Siberia earlier. It's just that no one wrote about them back then. Today, there's no crater at the site, only a scorched area and forest growing over it. Scientists continue to take samples, but even if the explanation turns out to be simple, the fact remains. Our planet remembers far more impacts than we usually think. Thuringian dagger. After heavy rains near the village of Gütersleben, northern Thuringia, a bronze dagger emerged from the soil. The finder didn't retrieve it and reported it to archaeologists. A restoration workshop in Weimar confirmed that it was a Bronze Age dagger, approximately 3,500 years old. It had a plate handle. The wide, flat heel of the blade was attached to the handle with rivets, usually made of wood, horn, or bone. The technology was complex for its time, casting a bronze plate, honing the edge, grinding the base of the handle, and drilling holes for the rivets. On such objects, the rivet marks reveal how the handle was held in place and whether the blade could withstand the load. Next comes alloy analysis, proportion of tin and impurities, X-rays, and corrosion stabilization. If organic matter remains on the handle, it will be possible to reconstruct the shape of the hilt. The artifact was found without a grave or cultural layer. It was likely pushed to the surface by shifting karst soil after a heavy rain. In any case, it is a valuable find. Direct evidence of crafts and exchanges in central Germany during the Bronze Age. Such daggers could have been working weapons, a status symbol, or a gift to the earth. An examination will reveal the exact scenario. Unauthorized searches are prohibited in the region, and prompt reporting of a find preserves both the object and information about it. After examination, the dagger is planned to be displayed at the Elric Regional Museum, from the field to a display case with a clear history of its origin. Mosaic with the 4 elements. During the final season of excavations at Urfa Castle, archaeologists uncovered a section of the floor that initially appeared to be ordinary masonry. But when they removed a layer of soil, it became clear. Beneath their feet lay a mosaic created in the 5th century, and it was in very good condition. Black, white, and red stones formed a pattern that simultaneously evoked geometry and the ancient cosmos. The mosaic depicts animals, plants, and the 4 elements. For people of the 5th century, this was a common way to explain the structure of the world, through natural imagery, easily understood in both religious and everyday contexts. Here, everything appears not as a ceremonial illustration, but as a clear picture of the world, used in an ordinary community. In a corner, archaeologists found a medallion, a circle depicting the celestial elements, like a microscopic model of the universe. Similar medallions were likely to be found in all 4 corners of the floor, but so far only one has been excavated. Nearby inscriptions mention Bishop Kiros, Priest Elias, and Deacon Rabulus, men who led the church community 1,500 years ago. 3 clergy burials were found near the mosaic. This suggests that the room was not just a hall, but part of a church, chapel, or martyrium, a place where the memory of martyrs was preserved. Urfa was generally considered the city of Abraham, and every layer here exudes ancient traditions, from Judaism to early Christianity. The mosaic has withstood earthquakes, reconstructions, wars, and eras. It was not torn down, destroyed, or replaced. It was simply covered over, and it lay underground for 1,500 years, its lines as clear as if it had been made for today's viewers. Bone multi-tool. Belgium, Skladina Cave. Archaeologists find the tibia of a cave lion, a giant predator that Neanderthals themselves usually feared. But this bone has experienced a second life. It has 4 different tools. One end is a chisel for gouging out wood. The long side is ground down and used to sharpen flint blades. The adjacent area is smoothed into a round scraper for cleaning skins. The opposite end is left sharp to pierce skin or hides. The age of the layer is about 130,000 years, the end of the Sol glaciation. The people who left the multi-tool did not simply break the bone for the sake of the tip. They invented a real ancestor of the Swiss knife. Small notches are preserved on the surface, traces of at least 2 stages of sharpening. This is both economy and technology. Instead of 4 separate devices, there is one, but modular. The fact that lion bone was chosen as the material is also noteworthy. Thick-walled, elastic, it holds the cutting edge longer than deer bone. This means that killing a predator became not only a victory in hunting, but also a supplier of premium raw materials for future weapons and tools. As a result, we see the first multifunctional in history. The Stone Age did not need rivets to invent the principle of the Swiss knife. Garmsar Salt Cave. In the Iranian province of Garmsar, there's a place that looks as if it were built by modern engineers. Enormous stone columns, smooth walls, a vault receding into darkness. But all of this was carved by hand during the Achaemenid Empire, approximately 2,500 years ago. Salt was mined here. Workers extracted layer after layer, leaving massive salt pillars between the workings, natural supports without which the cave would have collapsed. This method of extraction is rare, as ancient mines were typically small. Garmsar, however, is a vast system stretching for many kilometers, dating back to before the Hellenistic era. Salt here wasn't just for cooking, it was used in medicine, for food preservation, for household chores, and even in religious rituals. Therefore, the work was carried out meticulously. The excavations were carried out in straight lines, leaving a geometry that looks almost unreal today. The cave has 27 shafts, some extend tens of meters deep, and the most astonishing thing is that it remains completely stable. The salt columns have withstood time, earthquakes, and changes in humidity. The cave has become a tourist attraction. People come to see the underground city that requires neither cement nor metal beams. A dam from the wrong time. On the Vinalopó River near the Spanish city of Elche, there is a stone dam that was long considered to be a construction from the Islamic period. It seemed typical, a powerful structure at the mouth, massive walls, traces of canals, everything fit into the usual chronology. But a new study based on the method of optically stimulated luminescence has completely changed the picture. It turned out that this structure is 1,000 years older than the supposed date and was built at the end of the 1st century BC, during the era of the Roman Empire. The dam, over 130 meters long and about 4 meters high, turned out to be not just a part of the landscape, but an element of the entire hydraulic system of the Roman colony of Ilici. It worked not only as a flow regulator, but was probably also used to irrigate the surrounding lands. This was not a separate structure, but part of a complex engineering network. Thoughtful, logical, practical. In this story, there are no cults, no inscriptions, no myths. Just calculation, geometry, and a clear understanding of the terrain. The dam was not built for beauty. It was not decorated with bas-reliefs and was not written into legends. It was built so that it would stand, so that it would let water flow where it was needed, so that it would serve the city. And it still works. More than 2,000 years have passed. Civilizations have changed, languages have disappeared, but the dam has remained in its place. The world's oldest runestone. Archaeologists in Norway have made a sensational discovery, possibly the oldest known runestone. Sandstone fragments with runes carved into them were found in separate graves at the ancient cemetery of Svingerud. Researchers have discovered that the pieces fit together like a puzzle, forming a single stone with a unique engraving. Runes are ancient letters used to write Germanic languages before the transition to the Latin alphabet. The origin of runic writing remains a subject of debate, but early alphabets were used before 700 AD. Dating the stone using radiocarbon analysis showed that it is between 50 BC and 275 AD, making it the oldest known runic monument. What is special about the find is that the inscriptions on the stone are an unusual mixture of runes and unknown symbols. The carvings may have been made by different people at different times, and the stone itself may have been reused. Researchers believe that it originally served as a memorial marker for one grave, but was later broken and redistributed among other burials. Napoleon's bathroom. At the Villa Pisani in northern Italy, Napoleon's bathroom has been preserved, a place rarely shown to tourists, yet one that perfectly captures his character. By the standards of the early 19th century, it was practically a luxury of the future. A built-in bathtub, a dedicated grooming area, and personal accessories that Napoleon carried with him even on campaigns. He was unusually clean for his time. He washed every day, used rosemary and citrus cologne, shaved daily, and always carried a travel-size hygiene kit. Contemporaries recalled his white teeth and meticulousness in his daily life, a rare quality in an era when many people washed once a month. His mother taught him this habit, and he never deviated from it, whether in the army or at the height of power. The bathroom at the Villa Pisani is a rare example of a domestic detail of the emperor's life, preserved almost intact, and reveals what he was like outside of battle and politics. The La Palma Vase. La Palma is one of Spain's Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean, northwest of Africa. On its northwestern coast in the Tijarafe region, a rare find was discovered in a cave next to human remains, a complete ceramic vase dating from the 13th to 15th centuries. This ceramic belongs to the Benejorites, the original inhabitants of La Palma before the Spanish conquest. The discovery was made as part of the Proyecto Occidente project. Student Lourdes Barroso noticed the vessel during an examination, and Francisco Camaño's team documented the context and carefully removed the object. Analysis confirmed the funerary setting. The vessel was laid in situ and not in a mixed layer, which is extremely rare. The shape is typical of the local tradition, a rounded bottom, a wide neck, and smooth, unadorned walls. Such vessels were used both in everyday life and in rituals. It can be correctly interpreted as part of a burial kit next to the remains. Now archaeologists have the chance to test the composition of the clay and impurities, search for traces of the contents, and compare the shape with other assemblages on the island. The main value is its intactness and precise context. This allows us to speak not of an abstract Canarian style, but of specific practices. How exactly burials were designed on La Palma in the late medieval period, and what was considered necessary to be placed next to the person. Hidden relief. Nineveh, Northern Palace. During excavations, the floor was removed. Underneath it was a layer of dense clay, and under the clay, a huge stone slab, 6 by 3 meters, weighing about 12 tons. A solemn scene is carved on it. King Ashurbanipal between the patron god Ashur and the warlike Ishtar. On the edges, a fishman and a scorpion man, mythical guardians of the border between the world of people and gods. The pattern on the clothes, the feathers of the arrows, even the claws of the lions are visible so clearly as if the work was finished yesterday. Something else is unusual. The relief was carefully removed from the wall, placed face down and covered with earth. It is clear from the ceramics on top, this was done a couple of centuries after the fall of Assyria in Hellenistic times. Why hide such a thing? At the moment, there are 2 versions. The first is that the temple servants saved the shrine from robbers. The second is that the new authorities wanted to remove the reminder of the old ideology, but did not dare to destroy the image of the gods and the king. The slab lay in the ground for 2,000 years, even preserving traces of red paint in the folds of clothing. Now it gives a complete portrait of the Assyrian government and reminds us, sometimes history is not erased, but simply buried deeper, hoping that it will be forgotten. How an ancient wonder of the world was saved. In the early 19th century, engineers faced a problem. The Colosseum had begun to lean. Its southern section had already subsided in antiquity, but by the 1800s, the cracks had spread further and some of the walls were in danger of crumbling. To stop the collapse, Roman engineers adopted a solution that seems surprising today. They braced the amphitheater with giant iron hoops. These metal bands ran right along the outer perimeter, securing the masonry and distributing the load. Work began around 1807 and continued throughout most of the 19th century, strengthening the structure with new rings and supports. For the time, this was a massive undertaking. It required calculations, blacksmiths, and masons, and all of it was done without modern machinery. The hoops remain to this day and are easy to spot on the outer arches if you know where to look. The tomb that is not opened. Everyone knows about the Sphinx, but almost no one knows that there is probably a cavity underneath it, closed and even partially concreted. Back in the 1990s, geophysicist Thomas Dobecki conducted an acoustic sounding of the plateau. An anomaly was discovered under the front paws of the Sphinx, an empty chamber with clear rectangular edges. It could not be a natural formation. It was a room or a tomb or something else. This news blew up the world of alternative archaeology. The claims went even further. Supposedly, ancient Egyptian texts mentioned a certain Hall of Chronicles, a place where knowledge left by the gods before the flood is stored, and it could be located right there, under the Sphinx. One step, and we could open the door to the prehistoric past. But instead, there was silence. The Egyptian authorities did not give permission for excavations. The site was declared closed for research. Moreover, according to unconfirmed reports, the shaft at the bottom of the Sphinx was filled with concrete mixture. Just like that. No comment. Why is it not clear? Perhaps not because there is nothing there, but because they know exactly what is there. Monster burrows. There are thousands of tunnels in South America. Some are as narrow as animal burrows. Others are like the corridors of a military base, 4 meters wide and hundreds of meters long. Who dug them? Water and lava are out of the question. Geologists unanimously say, not nature. There are furrows on the walls as if from claws. In one of these caves in Argentina, they found the answer, the skeletons of 2 giant sloths. They weighed 4 tons each. Their claws were up to 20 centimeters long. That's what they needed tunnels of this size for. It is believed that they dug burrows for generations to raise their offspring and hide from the glacial climate. And narrower passages could belong to other monsters, ancient giant armadillos. Their modern descendants also dig, but on a smaller scale. And here the question arises, what else lies beneath our feet if such tunnels could be dug not by people, but by animals? They saw what life was like tens of thousands of years ago. Rotifers are microscopic multicellular creatures that are impossible to see without magnification. The smallest ones barely reach 40 microns, but they have everything inside: muscles, a digestive system, a nervous system, and even tiny jaws. On their heads is a rotifer, a crown of cilia that quickly rotates and draws everything digestible into their mouth. But the most important thing about rotifers is their ability to survive conditions incompatible with life. They can completely dry out, turn into a speck of dust, and remain that way for thousands of years. In Yakutia, rotifers were found that had been frozen for 24,000 years, and after thawing, they revived without any consequences. They also reproduce in an unusual way. Under normal conditions, only females are born, replicating themselves. But when cold or drought sets in, males emerge, and the fertilized eggs become armored containers that can survive any period of adverse conditions. Rotifers live in puddles, lakes, soil, literally anywhere there's even a little moisture. They're invisible, yet they're one of the most resilient life forms on the planet, able to survive even eras that would end in extinction for other creatures. Creepy artifact in the garden. A routine walk with a metal detector turned into a creepy find. A California resident accidentally discovered a mysterious chest buried in a friend's garden. At first, he expected to find only small items like coins or bottle caps, but instead he came across a heavy metal box covered in strange symbols. When the men opened the chest, they expected to see something valuable, but inside there was only dirt and a few plastic flowers. The main concern was the SS emblem, the symbol of Nazi Germany. Among the versions, the chest could have been used by soldiers of World War II to transport trophies. Despite many theories, the origin of the chest remains a mystery. Who buried it and why? Why is there only trash inside? Perhaps soon historians will be able to solve the mystery of this find. A skull mosaic in an ordinary house. In a house on a street in ancient Pompeii, archaeologists discovered a mosaic slab, not large, only about 40 centimeters, but much larger in meaning. In the center is a human skull, above it a scale, flanked by symbols of power and poverty. Everything is executed with exquisite detail. At first glance, it seems like a simple philosophical allegory, but the meaning is much deeper. This mosaic adorned the wall in the dining room where the owner received guests. It was there, where they ate, drank, and discussed business, that it served as a reminder that before death, all are equal. The skull symbolized mortality, the scales represented the balance of fate, and the butterfly above them represented the soul liberated after death. An inscription at the entrance reveals the owner's name, Vasonius Primus, a tanner and textile craftsman. An ordinary man, not a senator or a military leader, but he commissioned the image which typically adorned philosophical salons or public buildings. Apparently, he wanted to remind himself and others that wealth and poverty are erased equally. The mosaic lay under the ashes for almost 2,000 years. When it was discovered, the colors were preserved as if the work had only recently been completed. Today, it is kept in the Naples Museum. A family vault in the city center. In Martock, England, near All Saints Church, the ground suddenly collapsed. At first, it was thought to be a simple sinkhole caused by heavy rains. But when workers cleared the edge of the pit, it became clear. Beneath the surface lay a stone chamber, an 18th century family vault, unseen for nearly 300 years. The vault is built of local hamstone, the same type quarried in only 2 places in England. Inside, there are supposed to be shelves containing 4 burials belonging to a single family. It's unclear who exactly was buried here. Church records are currently being reviewed. However, there is a nearby tomb dating from 1760, and the style of the masonry suggests this one dates to the same period. Father Paul Fillory said the rains washed away the foundations, and the vault's roof simply gave way. No human remains are yet visible. Everything is buried under a mixture of rubble, earth, and debris. But the very fact that the crypt stood unnoticed for several centuries in the center of the village surprises even archaeologists. Tombs of this type were a sign of status. The family to which it belonged was likely wealthy, possibly the Pittard tanners, renowned in the area. Bassano Vase. Northern Italy, 15th century. A young bride is given a silver-carved vase for her wedding. The night ends with a murder. The bride dies with the vase in her hands and manages to curse the gift. Then the vessel wanders among relatives, and each new owner soon dies. History repeats itself so many times that the thing begins to be feared more than any weapon. At the end of the 20th century, the vase was allegedly dug up again. Inside was a folded sheet of paper with an inscription in English: "Beware, this vase brings death." The warning did not help. A pharmacist, a surgeon, an archaeologist, all left after contact with the object. In despair, the vase was thrown out of the window. A policeman was almost hit. Museums refused to take it. Then the trail goes cold. There is very little documentary evidence of this chain on the internet. What we have before us is more a legend than a verified museum artifact. But the legend lives on for decades and continues to pop up in collections of cursed things. Sometimes things become part of history not because archaeologists have studied them, but because storytellers have remembered them. DNA that doesn't match. We are used to thinking that the human genetic code has been studied inside and out. But in fact, there are still mysteries in our DNA that no one can answer. Scientists call them unexplained insertions, fragments that do not match the evolutionary line. They do not resemble primate DNA, nor known viral traces, nor random mutations, as if these pieces of code came from somewhere outside. There is a hypothesis that some of these sequences could have come to us through ancient contacts, with viruses or even with extraterrestrial microorganisms. It sounds fantastic, but in recent years, scientific journals have openly discussed the idea of panspermia. Life could have been brought to Earth by meteorites or comets. And if so, then it is possible that part of our genetic code is indeed alien. Some researchers go even further. They claim that there are structures in the human genome that are too ordered to be an accident, as if someone left a mark, a genetic watermark. Naturally, official science does not support such statements, but the very idea that we can have an alien trace encoded in us turns our understanding of man upside down. And then we must ask the question, who are we really? The result of random evolution or the bearers of a message left by someone who lived long before us? A figure without a face. In the Damjili cave in Azerbaijan, archaeologists have found a tiny sandstone figurine, just 5 centimeters long. The details are amazingly precise: hairstyle, belt, clothing, but the face is missing. No gender, no expression, only a restrained pose and a sense of image. This find is about 9,000 years old. This is the first Mesolithic human figurine found in the South Caucasus, but its value is not in its primacy. It is in the fact that it exists. In a region where ceramics were not yet known, someone was already trying to carve a person. Scientists believe that the figurine belongs to the transitional era, when nomads became sedentary, and not just dwellings arose, but rituals, memory, symbol. The Neolithic did not come here immediately. It manifested itself through such things, quietly, slowly, imperceptibly. A miraculously delivered letter. In Australia, a family was cleaning up trash on Wharton Beach when Deborah Brown's daughter spotted a bottle in the sand, a common coastal find until they discovered folded sheets of paper inside. The letters turned out to be signed by 2 World War I soldiers, Malcolm Alexander Neville and William Kirk Harley. The date was 1916. The text indicated that Neville was from Wilkewada, South Australia. Brown found his relatives on Facebook. His great-nephew Herbie Neville responded. It turned out that Malcolm was 28, and just a few months after throwing the bottle in the Great Australian Bight, he died in France. The family knew of him from a few stories, and then 100 years later, a letter literally came from the beach. They were also able to contact the relatives of the second soldier, Harley. His granddaughter says the entire family is still in shock. It feels as if her grandfather himself has reminded them of his past. For them, this bottle isn't just an artifact, but a direct connection with a man who has always been almost a legend to them. Oceanographer Charita Patiarachi suggests the bottle itself floated for only a short time, a few weeks or a month, before washing up on Wharton Beach. Most likely, it was quickly buried by sand, and for the rest of that time, it simply lay buried under a layer of sediment, waiting to be dug up again. Seated burials and a children's necropolis. In the French city of Dijon, archaeologists have discovered a unique burial site of Gauls that is over 2,000 years old. The unusual thing about the find is that all the deceased are sitting facing west, a rare ritual known only from a few places in France and Switzerland. The excavations were carried out in the garden of an old monastery where archaeologists came across 13 burials, The deceased are sitting with their hands on their torsos and their legs folded asymmetrically. The burials date back to the period 450, 25 BC. Researchers suggest that these graves could have contained priests, chieftains, or members of the same family. Next to these burials, a children's necropolis from the 1st century AD was found, where 22 infants were buried, many of whom did not live even a year. Some children were buried in wooden coffins, as evidenced by the nails found. Coins and ceramics were also found in the graves, probably burial gifts. However, part of the cemetery was destroyed due to agricultural work. The reason for the sitting burial remains a mystery. One version is related to the belief in the afterlife. Perhaps the deceased were supposed to meet the other world in a special pose. Other researchers believe that this is part of a spiritual practice. The pose could symbolize meditation or eternal peace. This is confirmed by Celtic figurines found in different parts of Europe. Gods from the underground. In ancient Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, archaeologists have unearthed a monumental relief. It was hidden in the ground right opposite the entrance to the throne room of the northern palace. The slab is almost 6 meters long and 3 meters high. It weighs about 12 tons. The image on it is striking in its detail. In the center of the relief stands King Ashurbanipal. On either side of him are the two main deities, the supreme god Ashur and the goddess Ishtar, the patroness of the city. Behind them are strange figures. One of them resembles a man with the body of a fish, the other a figure with raised arms, possibly a scorpion man. This is not a scene of submission, but of the assertion of power. The king is shown not as an ordinary ruler, but as a link between the world of people and gods. But the main thing is different. The relief was not destroyed. It was carefully buried, not thrown away, not broken, but hidden. This is done either to preserve it or to make sure no one else sees it. This happened after the fall of Assyria, probably in the Hellenistic period. And it's strange because these halls were known about back in the 19th century. The British took dozens of reliefs from there, but this one remained in place. Perhaps because no one knew where to look. Perhaps because it was intended that way. The relief itself was in the main part of the palace, right opposite the entrance, the most important place, the most visible. And then, silence for 2,000 years. The Iron Cages of Münster. 3 metal cages hang from the spire of St. Lambert's Church in Münster. Tourists often mistake them for decorative elements, but they are a true piece of 16th century history. The bodies of the leaders of the Münster Rebellion of 1534 to 1535 were displayed in these cages after their executions. At that time, the city fell under the control of the radical Anabaptist movement. Its leaders, Jan of Leiden, Bernd Knipperdolling, and Bernhard Krechting, introduced new laws, created a new order, and besieged the city. After the fall of the Münster Commune, all 3 were publicly executed, and then their bodies were placed in these cages to show the rest of Europe how such rebellions ended. Over time, the remains were removed, but the cages remained. They have been repaired several times, moved higher, but their meaning remains the same. They are a straightforward, honest artifact of that era without any cut corners. Now they seem like something out of a museum, but in the 16th century they were a visual warning to the people, visible from every corner of the city. These cages have survived wars, reconstructions, and the changing eras, and still hang in the bell tower, one of the most unusual reminders of Europe's religious conflicts. The Fino Dagger. During construction work in the village of Fino in northern Hungary, archaeologists discovered an iron dagger dating back over 3,000 years. The weapon was found in an ancient burial alongside the remains of pottery and jewelry. This is not uncommon. Such items are common in the Bronze Age, but this particular specimen was special. The blade is made of meteorite iron. Analysis revealed a characteristic nickel-cobalt ratio, exactly what is found only in extraterrestrial alloys. Essentially, the weapon was made from a fragment that fell from the sky. The find dates back to around the 13th century BC, long before humans learned to smelt iron from ore. This means that meteorite metal was the only source of iron at the time. A rare, expensive, and almost sacred material, such items could only have belonged to the elite or priests. Similar daggers have been found in other regions, from Mesopotamia to Egypt. The most famous example is the dagger from Tutankhamun's tomb. They are all made using the same principle. Forged metal, not melted, but cut and polished by hand. Scholars suggest that weapons made of heavenly iron were perceived as a sign of a special connection with the gods. At that time, there was no way to explain the origin of this metal, and so it was valued not for its strength, but for its origin. Skeletons of giants. Strange notes can be found in the archives of the 19th and 20th centuries. Skeletons up to 3 meters tall were found in the burial mounds of North America. In the Andes, archaeologists spoke of jaws and skulls too large for a human, but almost all of these finds disappeared. Some blame the church, others blame state institutions that cleaned up inconvenient evidence. Myths of different peoples repeat the same thing. The Sumerians wrote about the Anunnaki, tall as towers. The Bible mentioned the Nephilim, sons of God who took earthly women for themselves. Indian tribes told of battles with giants who came from heaven and ate human flesh. Scientists explain the legends as fantasies and mistakes. But why is this motif found among peoples who are not related to each other? And why is it always associated with heaven and gods? If giants really existed, they could have been either another branch of humanity or hybrids of humans and aliens. In that case, the history of our planet is not only the evolution of Homo sapiens, but also coexistence with those who were much larger and stronger. Psychoactive vessels. In 2024, archaeologists discovered a vessel in the temple of the goddess Hathor, on the walls of which was depicted the smiling god Bes, the patron of dreams, childbirth, and, as it turned out, something much stranger. Traces of a substance were preserved inside the vessel. Its chemical analysis gave an unexpected result: a mixture of alcohol, honey, and psychoactive components, including those that cause strong visual hallucinations. In fact, it was an ancient psychotropic cocktail. What is even stranger is that the vessel was ritual. Its contents apparently were not used for pleasure, but for communication, perhaps with the gods, perhaps with the dead, or maybe with those whom the Egyptians themselves did not fully understand, but whose presence they felt. In the same complex, images of creatures with disproportionate bodies and eyes were found, too strange to be just allegories. It is believed that Egyptian priests used such mixtures to enter special states. During these rituals, they allegedly received knowledge that could not be conveyed in words. It was from such immersions that prophecies, geometric patterns, and architectural solutions emerged. What if the Great Pyramid is also the result of someone's revelation? A box bed. In late medieval Europe, there was a type of furniture that seems strange today: closed box beds. These were wooden boxes with doors or curtains containing a sleeping area. Essentially, they were a box bed. They were installed in homes for one simple reason: warmth. In unheated rooms, the temperature at night could be close to the outside temperature, and the walls were drafty from all sides. A closed bed retained the person's heat, turning the small space into a cozy house. Sometimes it was so warm inside that even infants were placed there to keep them warm. These beds were made of solid wood, decorated with carvings or ornaments. In wealthy homes, they looked like part of the interior, while in ordinary ones, they looked like a simple wooden box. People usually slept in them in a semi-sitting position, a position considered healthier and more comfortable. A closed bed was considered a sign of wealth. It was placed in the warmest parts of the house, and sometimes it became a status symbol, almost like a private room. Today, such beds can be seen in museums in France, the Netherlands, and Germany. And despite their strange appearance, the interior is truly surprisingly cozy, especially when you imagine how cold European homes were several centuries ago. Mummy of a Yakut lion. In November 2024, Russian paleontologists completed the study of a unique find: the mummy of a Homotherium kitten that had lain in the Yakut permafrost for about 35,000 years. This is one of the rarest specimens of ancient predators that dominated vast territories for millions of years, from North America to Africa. Homotheriums were powerful predators, competing with lions, saber-toothed tigers, and even hyenas. They hunted in packs, and their fangs, although shorter than those of smilodons, were thicker and stronger, allowing them to pierce the skin of large animals, such as young mammoths. Unlike solitary ambush smilodons, Homotheriums preferred driven hunts, like wolves. Their powerful paws and developed chests made them hardy pursuers. The find from Yakutia allowed scientists to study the kitten's appearance in detail. At 3 weeks old, it already had a massive neck, a wide muzzle, and paws resembling skis ideal for moving through the snow. A comparison with a modern lion cub showed that Homotherium was stockier and more muscular. Despite its adaptations, Homotherium became extinct about 10,000 years ago. Their specialized hunting strategy proved ineffective in the face of melting glaciers and competition with primitive humans. Egyptian artifacts in Antarctica. This story sounds like science fiction, but some sources, including reports from military expeditions during World War II, point to strange finds in the Queen Maud Land region of Antarctica. Among them are fragments of columns allegedly covered in hieroglyphs and the remains of stone structures resembling Egyptian capitals. None of this has been officially recognized, and all the objects have either disappeared or have been declared natural formations. But the question remains, where did this evidence come from? One theory suggests that in ancient times Antarctica was not covered in ice. The Piri race map, compiled in the 16th century, shows the outlines of the continent's coastline under the ice, with an accuracy that modern cartographers have only achieved with the help of satellites. How did a cartographer from the 1500s know this? And if he didn't know, who did he copy from? Some alternative researchers believe that civilizations could move between continents long before our understanding of migration. If Egypt really was part of a network spanning the Earth, then perhaps its traces can really be found in the most unexpected places, where no one is looking. One private report leaked online spoke of a fragment of an artifact found in an ice cave, metal, an unknown alloy, engravings, undeciphered symbols close to Egyptian. But the artifact disappeared, and all the participants of the expedition signed a non-disclosure agreement. The Lady with the Inverted Diadem. During excavations in Boeotia, archaeologists discovered a necropolis dating back to the 7th century BC, but one grave immediately stood out from the rest. It was the burial of a young woman now known as the Lady with the Inverted Diadem. She was approximately 20 to 30 years old, and her status is immediately apparent from her grave goods. But it was the position of the jewelry that became the key to the unusual ritual. On her head lay a bronze diadem with lions, symbols of power throughout the ancient Mediterranean. A large rosette once shone in the center. Such jewelry was worn by members of the aristocracy, sometimes by families associated with rulers. But the diadem in the grave was inverted. The lions are lying down with the rosette underneath. In the ancient world, an inverted crown almost always signified the loss of power or renunciation of it. Archaeologists believe the woman may have belonged to a family whose political power was waning during an era when hereditary power was fading, giving way to aristocracy and new forms of governance. The grave contained 2 large brooches, a necklace with a pendant, ivory jewelry, bronze rosettes, earrings, bracelets, and spiral rings on almost every phalanx, an array that underscores her high status. A nearby child's burial of a girl wearing a similar diadem suggests their relationship. Golden Ring. Jerusalem, City of David. Under the floor of a late Roman, early Byzantine building, archaeologists have found a small gold ring about 2,300 years old, that is, still from the Second Temple period and Hellenistic influence. It is smooth, without inserts, modest. The ring was not lying separately, but in the backfilled technical layer of the foundation. Construction filler immediately went above it. This means that it was placed during the laying of the foundation and not accidentally lost. And this is not an isolated case. In the same area, a second similar ring and several small pieces of jewelry were found within a year, also under the foundation. Researchers recall a Hellenistic custom. Engaged girls or their families buried jewelry and children's things in the foundation of a new house, a symbol of the transition to adulthood and a request for protection. The character matches. Small size, female context, gold that was worn every day. The artifact is currently in the Israel Antiquities Authority's laboratory. The metal is being analyzed for alloys, traces of garnet or other stone are being looked for, and it is being compared with similar items to determine its origin. Lacquer coffin. In 2018, archaeologists discovered a unique 700-year-old lacquer coffin from the Yuan dynasty in China's Jiangsu province. Its bright red surface was perfectly preserved thanks to a multi-layered lacquer coating that protected the wood from moisture and decay. Lacquer coffins were a symbol of high status in China, and their creation required complex technologies. The lacquer was applied in several layers and then polished to a shine. This method of preservation allowed the coffin to survive centuries with virtually no damage. The find is also important because the Yuan dynasty left relatively few burials, and this coffin can tell us a lot about the funeral traditions of that time. Footprints in stone. In 1952 in Texas, in the Paluxy riverbed, workers were clearing the stone and came across a chain of clear prints. These were dinosaur footprints, large, elongated, in some places almost a meter long. There were many of them. It seemed that ancient lizards really walked along this place, one after another, leaving a path in the stone behind them. But nearby they noticed something strange, prints similar to human feet, long with the outlines of fingers. Some of them overlapped the dinosaur tracks. It was because of this that the place became a source of controversy. Some people saw a sensation in the find. Supposedly, this was proof that people and dinosaurs existed at the same time. Scientists were more cautious. Some explained the shape of the tracks by erosion, others, fakes. There are known cases when such human tracks were cut directly into limestone, then sold to tourists. There is still no exact version. But regardless of the controversy, the painting itself is the imprint of movement left 100 million years ago, and that is already amazing enough. A disease that killed in a day. Historical chronicles of the Middle Ages record an epidemic that is rarely mentioned today. Miliaria, or English sweating sickness, appeared suddenly, spread rapidly, and disappeared just as abruptly. The disease acted with alarming speed. Often less than a day passed between the first chills and death. Symptoms began abruptly: headaches, aching necks and shoulders, and a high fever. Within a few hours, the body would become covered in a sticky sweat, followed by convulsions, dizziness, and sometimes hallucinations. People would simply lie down and fall asleep, never waking up again in the morning. If a person survived the first 24 hours, their chances of survival increased dramatically. The first outbreak occurred in 1485, immediately after the Battle of Bosworth Field. Subsequent waves followed in 1507, 1517, 1528, and 1551. The disease favored warmer months, rarely affected Scotland and Wales, and for some reason more often struck the upper classes, dukes, mayors, and clergy. Even Henry VIII was so frightened that he constantly moved between residences, trying to avoid infection. The origin of the disease is unclear. Modern researchers consider the most likely theory to be hantavirus, a genus of viruses carried by mice. The symptoms are similar, as is the seasonality. Another hypothesis is an arbovirus transmitted by mosquitoes or ticks. Less commonly cited are theories about food toxins or fungi. In the 17th to 19th centuries, a similar disease, the Picardy sweating fever, appeared in France. It was milder and the mortality rate was not as high, but the symptoms resembled the old miliaria. This leads some historians to believe that the disease may not have disappeared but simply changed form. The miliaria remains one of those epidemics that swept across Europe quickly and with little explanation. Even today, no one can say for sure what exactly was killing thousands of people or why the disease disappeared so suddenly. And I want to thank you for watching this video to the end. Bye everyone, and see you in the next video.